As the sun rose in the morning of May 25, 2009, the news of the death of Dr. Tajudeen Rahim shocked people across the globe.
I received the phone call at 3:30 in the morning.
Taju, as many called him, was driving to Jomo Kenyatta International Airport to catch a flight to Kigali, Rwanda, when he was involved in an accident at around 1 a.m.
And to get this phone call at 3:30 in the morning and to anticipate that the guy is just sick and we were going to go to hospital and get him out, and then to find out that he was actually at the funeral home.
It was confirmed that he got an accident on Mombasa Road, and we had me and Irungu and a couple of other guys, I can't remember their names, had to be called to go to Lee funeral and confirm, make a confirmation that surely it was him.
The early morning email and SMSs sent to many across the globe left most of them stunned.
For us here in the office, we used all the means possible to relay, first of all, the information to members of his immediate family in Nigeria. That was through a telephone call. And for the rest of the campaigners with whom we work in Africa, we did an email.
It said that he has been killed in a car accident last night.
Outside the Lee funeral home in Nairobi, his colleagues and friends gathered to map out the next course of action. Widely known as a Pan-Africanist, Dr. Tajudeen Rahim was until his death the Deputy Director in charge of Africa for the United Nations Millennium Campaign. From his office in Nairobi, he crisscrossed the continent to fight against poverty, advocate for gender equality, and champion for environmental sustainability. Taju's aim was also to make sure that Africans could access basic education and healthcare in a fair political atmosphere.
Tajudeen is probably the most effective Pan-Africanist that I know.
Kind of person who I think you constantly hear the reverberations of laughter from, even when you don't see him.
Oh, I'm so devastated. We know he has lived many lives. Maybe that's why he didn't have time. He was always doing diverse things in his life. But still, I have never felt a loss like today.
Tajudeen hailed from Nigeria, but everybody who has ever interacted with him knows that Tajudeen is an African.
He's always the person to embrace anyone, to see potential in people and want to push them along, not in a patronizing way, but he gathers up followers, because he lives his belief, and he believed in a united Africa, and to him at a personal level that meant uniting individual Africans.
Because he died a Muslim, decisions had to be made as fast as possible. With his wife and children living in the UK and the request from his relatives to fly the body to Nigeria, arrangements had to be made in order for the burial to take place within the shortest period.
That's when they do the prayers in the Jewish.
Local Muslims were more than willing to proceed with the final rites in case the decision to fly Taju was reversed.
The post-mortem has been completed. Multiple injuries, both head and body. So you all know what happened, an accident on the road. The plan is to fly him on Ethiopian Airlines.
After the post-mortem was done and the body ready for transportation, workmates, friends and comrades bid farewell to Taju. The emotional event was followed by prayers held by leaders representing the Muslim community in Nairobi. The convoy left for the airport at around 1 p.m. local time. As Taju's body was midway between Nairobi and Lagos, His comrades and friends reconvened at a conference hall next to his office.
This is a celebration of a life well lived.
In Uganda, I never came personally in touch with him, but he used to be a weekly writer in one of the Ugandan newspapers. And I'm sure many people in Uganda will miss his articles.
The session, which comprised of workmates, students, politicians, diplomats and members from the civil society as well as non-governmental organizations, went on until late into the night.
One of the amazing things about Taju, many of you who know him well, when somebody asks him, how are you? Most of us will say, I'm okay. He says, I will be okay. I'm a hopeful African. And that kind of characterized a lot of what he was. He was okay, but never fully okay because he was too impatient, too restless to accept whatever the current situation was. He's just a really big guy with a big mind, a big heart.
Losing Tajudeen means that we've lost a huge data bank, much more than a library. For me, Taju is an icon that will never fade. He's carved an admirable place and a path for those of us who carry on the journey that he started.
It was not only to reflect on the man and his ideals, but also a forum to chart the way forward now that he has departed.
Kenya is going through a similar phase. You will overcome. All that you need is a group that is resolute. You have to be confident in yourselves as a nation. The rest of Africa respects Kenya and expects to see better things from Kenya. And I think that one of the things that Taju has done in this country is to say that Pan-Africanism as a philosophy is Pan-Africanist. It does not distinguish between countries. It does not distinguish between tribes and races. And I hope that Kenyans will get to the point where the struggle will be for one united Kenya, one Pan-African government in the region, one Pan-African government in the whole of Africa.
He sought activists in every country that he went to. I didn't know him, but he found me just to find out my story about my activism and what I did for Kenya.
I saw in him a person of extraordinary ability, not just his ability to communicate, but his intellectual power was extraordinary. Tajudeen knew that the power of the pen could convey perhaps messages in words in which verbally someone could not actually do so. And as I stand here, I look over from Oxford. We both finished at about the same time. I took an academic career. Tajudeen wanted to change the world and said he was a Pan-Africanist. He was returning to the continent and he was going to embrace that goal.
Tajudeen provided a home through Arab, along with people like Zaya, for people that were on the Kenyan underground. People like Wanyiri Kihoro, like the late Wanjiru Kihoro. So that was one of the spaces where we used to meet. People who were on the underground, not just from Kenya, but from all the other African countries. People who had left Ghana because they were not happy about what was happening in Ghana. I met Yao Graham through Tajudeen. I met people who we now know about his work through Tajudeen. And so that warmth of Tajudeen, Tajudeen was a big man, and I'm not talking about his girth. Tajudeen's heart was huge. Tajudeen had a heart for Africa.
And Abdurrahman said, whatever you do, Gurmai, while you're here in London, make sure you don't leave London without meeting this Tajudeen from Nigeria. And I said, okay, you're going to have to get me his contact, but now I have a meeting to go to at SOAS, and I had to rush to this meeting, and only to walk into that meeting and see this firebrand absolutely shooting words left and right, shaking the audience. I mean, I said, who is this man? And somebody said, Tajudeen. And it was very nice meeting him because when they brought him to me and said, this is the man, the EPLF man from Eritrea, he first said, so now we have to debate about Pan-Africanism and socialism. Sit down. This man has nerves.
It was a very lively and loud conversation. Lots and lots of laughter. And we hadn't noticed, but there was next to us a couple, a white couple. I think they were trying to enjoy their dinner. And after a while, the gentleman got up and came to our table and said, "Excuse me, please, could you keep your voices down? We are trying to have dinner here." Immediately our table went quiet. Then Tajudeen pulled back his chair and got up. And at that point, the whole room went quiet. The whole restaurant at Aberdare Country Club went quiet. He turned around, looked at this man and said, You are exactly the kind of a person I've been waiting to meet." And the rest of the conversation was really awful.
He also was a person who brought us together with the other African struggles. I have colleagues like Zaya Yebu here. The passionate campaigns that he was always involved with Ghana, South Africa, and Kenya. After meeting Abdurrahman Mohamed Babu, who had visited the liberated territories, and at that time I edited a magazine called Africa Events, in which many of the articles on the Eritrean struggles were published. He was convinced that in fact it was a struggle that was worth the African people to get involved. And he was in fact very vigorous in campaigning on the issue of Eritrea eventually, to the point that in fact he became one of the voices of the Eritrean.
Irungu, Deve and Wole accompanied the body to Nigeria. From Nairobi, they flew to Addis Ababa, where they had a 3-hour stopover and thereafter headed for Lagos.
The three of us had accepted to represent the community from Kenya and to make sure that the body would be accompanied from Nairobi right through to Abuja, where it would be received by Nigerian and other African comrades. The three of us found it very difficult to sleep that night, but the one thing that we felt very confident about is that we were taking him home, and that this was the right decision to have done, rather than, as we had considered, burying him in Nairobi.
They arrived at dawn.
As we arrived in Lagos airport, we found several comrades and friends there. We found BC, we found Napoleon, we found Kayode, we found Adiambo, a whole range, Adebayo, a whole range of Nigerian-based colleagues were there.
The casket was again aboard another local flight to Abuja just 2 hours after its arrival at Murtala Mohammed Airport.
We found Munira and Aisha and Aida there, and small Aisha said, I want to ride in the car. I want to ride in the car with my daddy. So she got into the ambulance and she drove the 500 kilometers north to the state of Katsina and to the very village that Tajudeen had been born. So as we drove down this little stretch of road to Tajudeen's house, the heavens just broke. And it rained for a while. And I thought this is going to make the ceremony even more difficult. But of course, recognizing that in African culture, this is ultimately a blessing. And that for it to happen at this point was not just a coincidence, but obviously is linked to some greater power that even Tajudeen, with all his charisma and personality, respected. As we arrived at the house, the rain stopped. And I still don't quite understand how that happened, but we drove in and we found the compound full, completely full, almost saturated with men, women, children.
As the sun sets a day after his death, Taju's body was prepared for burial according to the Islamic tradition.
He was then wrapped traditionally as it is in accordance with Islam in a white cloth and carried in a small basket above the heads of the men.
It was thereafter carried to the mosque for prayers and eventually to the graveyard.
And after the prayers took place, we then left the mosque and proceeded to the final resting ground. The burial site had been dug in accordance with the Islamic faith, and he was then placed in the grave and covered initially with boards. And then they put mud very deliberately across that. And it moved very fast. There were no speeches, there were no poems, there were no tributes, but essentially the Imam gave the last prayers, and we finalized this. He was buried under a small baobab tree. So for people who go looking for his grave one day, it will be very easy to mark, because there will be this baobab tree that will continue to grow and flourish. I think the final comment that for me sticks in my head was the comment by Chidi Odinkalu, who said he left as a very humble boy on his way to study in the UK, and he returned as a giant.
Dr. Tajudeen Abdulrahim's death has definitely left us with a number of questions which need answers. Many are left wondering as to what really happened on his way to the airport.
When we came back to the house, he told me he will go by himself because he was going for only 2 days. So he will leave the car at the airport, then when he comes, he'll drive himself back home.
On the Pan-African front, some would ask, was he compromised after joining the United Nations Millennium Programme? Did he tone down his voice in championing issues affecting Africa? As a General Secretary of the Global Pan-African Movement, what was discussed and agreed upon during the historical 7th Pan-African Congress in Uganda? The answers to some of these questions will be contained in the forthcoming comprehensive video documentary, which will take us through Taj's journey. Tajudeen Abdulrahim is definitely not with us anymore, but he will forever be alive, for his deeds live and will continue to guide and influence us in the future. He was a development activist who advocated for a common unity among the peoples of Africa and the African diaspora.
To try to make sure that that flame, that Pan-Africanism flame, will continue.
He was a very caring husband, a very caring, loving, humane person,
He resisted exploitation on the basis of color or race. He was in the forefront to champion for freedom, dignity, and the unity of Africans. Don't agonize, organize was his favorite slogan, a signature at the end of his emails, articles, and speeches.